Hello everybody. Today I'm going to take a look at a 45-45 game that I played uh, probably going on a year ago. It was a while back. I've done a video analysis of it before. However, this was back in the day when my YouTube account was only limited to 15 minutes of length. And that is not enough time to really treat a game the way it needs to be treated. So I thought I would take another look at the game, this time a little bit more in depth, and maybe explore some things that I hadn't explored, and maybe not feel so rushed. So today I'm going to take a look at my very first 45-45 Team League game, and I'm going to probably go through each one of them in more detail than I ever did before. So this game was against a user named Nakazani, and he was slightly lower rated than I was, and my rating then was about what it is now. It's just slightly lower. And I think looking back at this game, I actually am surprised. I think I played fairly well. This was back before I really started practicing tactics and things like that. It was just when I was interested, but I was really taking my time and focusing, and I thought wound up playing pretty well. Don't think I made any major mistakes, and I think I capitalized on his pretty well. So I'm going to take you through the opening first here, which is a little bit unusual, but it's a typical French defense for a while. There is one little quirk right here where the move orders of c3 and knight f3 for white are sort of reversed. Now, as black, typically today, what I would do right now is, instead of playing knight c6 as I did in the game, I would play c takes almost immediately, and that way this pawn chain isn't nearly as difficult to attack. Meaning, if I were to take c takes d4 right now, there's no pawn on c3 to recapture to reinforce this pawn chain. So white is going to have to either do this or this. And neither one of these is going to be particularly good for having a pawn chain in the center. So, whoops, let's go back to the beginning of the game. I didn't want to go that far ahead yet. So here we go. Slightly out of order here, but I ignored it and played a typical transposition back into this normal French advance, and I believe it's Paulson variation. I think that's pretty main line, actually. I'm not 100% on what the terminology for that line is, but this is, whenever I think of the French advance variation, this is what I almost always think of. But it goes kind of off the rails right here as he plays this unusual move a4, and I looked for a long time. I think I spent a long time in the game trying to figure out why he would play a4. I had assumed that he was going to play bishop b5 here. I mean, that's just what that seems like. I wasn't really sure what the point was. Maybe if there's an exchange there, if I were to play bishop d7 and we're going to do a try variation here. So if I were to play bishop d7 here, maybe he would play bishop b5, and then, you know, if there were some trick here, and I don't even think there is, but if there were some trick here like this, I mean, and it's possible that this works and wins a pawn. I guess he would do this, wouldn't he? So maybe that wouldn't be what I would do. But point being, I don't know what this pawn is going to do. First of all, let's look here. If he is going to play a5, then as it stands now, I just take the pawn, because it's attacked twice by my two pieces right here and only defended by his rook. So a5 is just going to hang a pawn. And I didn't really see any other purpose behind this. It doesn't really do anything for a b4 push. b4 right now is just going to hang a pawn, because I have the bishop on f8 pointing towards b4 as well as the pawn. So, I mean, a4, I looked for a long time and couldn't find anything that really made sense out of it. So what I did was I just decided to swap on d4 and kind of proceed normally. I wanted to resolve some of the tension in the center just so I could see if I could make a4 turn into some sort of a weakness, which, you know, I don't really know how to do that, but that's what I was thinking at the time. So I'm not sure that c takes d4 is really right here, but I don't know what else is. Probably bishop d7 is good there. There might be some f6 kind of things, but it seems a little too early for attacking on that end before you take on d4. So maybe here bishop d7 is a little bit better, but I think what I did was fine. I think this is fine. Now instead of, here I think he has a few, I don't know if they're misconceptions, but I think he has a little bit grander idea of what his attack is going to do than it really does. He instead of taking c takes d4 here, what he does is play a5, which is already pointed out just loses that pawn. But what's happened now is, well, we'll just look. Instead of taking there, he pushes a5. I take with the knight. Obviously he can't take with the rook, or the queen just grabs the rook. But I don't know if he thought this was a fork or not, but it does come with some interesting little idea. Obviously knight c6, I don't think there's anything besides knight c6 here. So in order to not lose the knight, but we're in check here. It's sort of a fork, but knight c6 gets the knight to safety and blocks the check, so it's good. Probably the only move there. But here, since he did that in between, c takes d4, instead of playing c takes d4, he plays knight takes d4. And now what we have is a pinned knight, and the knight is being attacked now by his knight on d4. Now he doesn't have a central pawn chain anymore, which sort of hurts a little bit. But this pin here, and just for fun, let me see if I can make a little arrow there. Oh yeah, you have to drag, don't you? Nope. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. Okay, well I figured that out, didn't I? Anyway, I might... I know you do... yeah, I know I can change the color of it. Excuse me. So, wouldn't I just drag then? No. Okay. Well, anyway, I thought maybe that might be kind of fun to do, but it's not. It's not happening in this video. I might do that for another video. So I have this diagonal here that could be a problem. So my initial thought is to play bishop d7 here, which is pretty typical anyway, and we're going to need to break that pin. So bishop d7 is the move, and from here he's able to pile up a little bit more. Obviously we can't take b5 because the knight. So the knight is doing two jobs. One is protecting what used to be a pinned piece, but it's attacking what used to be a pinned piece, and it is also supporting this thrust into b5 along with the queen. So now we have lots of pressure along this diagonal again, which is a pretty important diagonal, and we have the possibility of, bring up the move list over here. We have the possibility of maybe relieving some of that tension pretty soon in a positive way. So is there, it's black's move here, so is there a way to resolve that tension in a way that favors black right now? I don't believe there is. If we play knight takes, and we're going to try that variation, here, this looks pretty bad to me. I mean, there's nobody guarding d7, so I don't think that this pawn is technically, in other words, whoops, I should probably do this. Let's get out of the try. This knight is effectively still pinned by the battery, excuse me again, the battery on lining up on d7, and then e8 in the distance, the skewer towards the king here. So, or the pin. There are a lot of pinned pieces here still trying to work their way out. So what I want to do here, and by the way, if it's white's turn and we just start swapping pieces, we have 3 attackers, and right now we have 3 defenders. So my thought was then just to throw another defender in the mix. Here though, knight ge7, is that what I just did? Yeah. What I could have done, is that the variation I just tried? I'm trying to look at my my PGN thing here. Let me look at this. Let me click this. Oh, if I'd have played knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Here's the thing. Yeah. So that's what I was trying to remember if I did it correctly, which I did not. So here was our move. And I was looking at knight takes d4 just a second ago, but knight takes e5 is actually doable because it protects d7. So let's go into knight takes e5. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. So knight takes e5 works because the knight protects on d7. So this was something that I missed over the board in the game, and looking at just the typical way that would work. So this looks fine, I think, for black. Uh, White would just probably start continuing development, and black, I think, is going to be just fine in this variation. So back to what actually happened in the game. Knight e7, which is just reinforcing c6. We have the pin on c6, so we're going to continue to defend that. And now, white is trying to line up some discoveries. This diagonal here becomes important. Now if the knight on d4 were to take on c5, c6, then we're going to have some real problems with the queen because the diagonal is being attacked with that bishop. So next it seems that black is going to want to get off of that diagonal, but still protect c6. So the best place to do that is to play queen c7. Right. Here white reinforces the e5 pawn. Since I showed you earlier that knight takes e5 was actually in the cards, white probably found that and went ahead and decided to get f4 in. Now f4 is pretty typical in these positions anyway, to help reinforce the center, and that usually happens whenever black finally undermines on this side. White just says, okay, f4, and now we've got that pawn on e5 still being protected with a central pawn chain, advanced central pawn chain. So at this point, however, we can relieve some of the tension, since now the pin is released on the knight. We have two attackers of d7, and we have two defenders. The queen, when it was on b6, was not defending d7, but when we brought it back to c7, it had the effect of helping out with d7. So now the pin is broken, so we can start to relieve some of this tension. All right. This recapture is white played bishop takes d4 rather than c takes d4, and it might have been interesting to look at this. And we have to bring this over here and say try. It might have been interesting to look at this variation, since this pawn chain could be pretty solid right there. I don't have a c pawn to challenge the d4 square anymore. It's reinforced twice. Now this bishop looks worse than it looked in the other variation, since it's just kind of holding up this pawn chain on its shoulders. But I think it can easily just redeploy to f3 or to f2 or d2, and then have some decent diagonals. It's now white's bad bishop, but it is definitely something that it can get to be more active than right here. And you may just want to keep it right here for this middle game, and then maybe see what it can do other than that later. So I don't think this looks bad, and in fact it has some pluses. Black's plan here would probably be necessarily to chip away somehow with f6, and that's not easy to do at this point, since the knight and bishop are in awkward places for f6 to work. With a knight on e7 instead of g8, when the knight was on g8, it supports an f6 advance. With the knight on e7, it's in a strange place. Now, we do have a little hole here for knight e5. It can be kicked with g4, but g4 is somewhat weakening for white, so it's not all bad. So knight f5, sorry, knight f5 might be something that black would want to do here to help weaken the central control for white. Alright, so getting out of that variation back into the game, white played bishop takes d4, which is fine, I think. And now, wanting to continue the development of black, this doesn't repin the knight, it just kind of interferes and attacks that bishop. It kind of interferes with this battery on d7 so that there's a little bit less pressure there. If white were able to successfully draw away the queen somehow, and I know it's not possible now, but something like bishop b6 drawing the queen away here, and then we have some problems on d7. So there are some threats there with that battery lined up, even though the battery is successfully defended with queen c7 right now. It's not something that we want to keep in the air. So now with the tension relieved a little bit there, we can maybe start thinking about a6 and getting this battery out of the way. But white's attack here is kind of fizzling quickly, so going to want to do something. And of course the d4 bishop now is under attack, And what could happen here, say it's black's turn again, is if black plays knight takes d4, then c takes d4 or queen takes d4, either is fine. But now we're going to have a little bit less control in the center than we did in the variation I showed before with the bishop on e3 and the 3 pawns in the center. So the center is coming under attack a little bit now. Black's starting to get developed just a little bit, and white's pin and battery attack over here on the queen side is starting to fizzle as well. There isn't much point to it anymore. Alright, so white decides to relieve some of that tension. Now we could play b takes c6 here, we could play queen takes c6, or we could play bishop takes c6. One consideration I had, I believe, during the game was not to play bishop takes c6 because, looking at it, yeah, I wish that would pop up over here instead of over there. One thing is playing b takes c6 has two problems. One, well, it sets up a tactic here, doesn't it, right now? If I play c5, then I'm attacking the queen and the bishop at the same time. So that would be interesting. I would gain a little bit of a tempo by doing it that way. I don't believe I saw that at the time. But now I've got a weak a pawn. And that was something that I wanted to avoid, was trying not to have obviously weak pawns like that. But this would be interesting. Say white just ignored that and hung out over here. This is obviously bad, but the tactic, just in case you didn't see what I was talking about. Here we have the bishop being attacked and the queen being attacked, so white's going to lose a piece here, I believe. Alright, so back to our actual position. I did not play b takes c6 because of the weak a pawn. Instead, I took on c6 with the bishop. And one thing is, obviously in the French defense, this bishop is a lot of times a problem. The light square bishop in the French defense is a lot of times a problem. And one of the things that black will try to do in these games, hopefully in a middle game, especially now that black has two bishops against a bishop and a knight, getting this bishop active is going to be a major, major deal for black. In fact, I would say if black can succeed in getting this bishop onto one of these three squares right here, and especially e4, if black could get its bishop to e4 or outside of the pawn chain somehow and active, doing something active, that would almost be enough to win the game at this point. Simply because there's no counterpoint or counterpart for that in the white defense. It's going to be a real advantage to have that piece since there's no light square bishop for white. Say black had that bishop on d4 and then the queens got traded off, then there are all kinds of squares on the board, 32 of them to be exact, that black could deal with that white would have no answer for. So that bishop right there would be a very, very strong piece. Alright, there was a, let's see, is it here? Yeah, so obviously white's queen is under attack and he needs to move. Just moving the queen off of this file, now we have an a pawn, the a7 pawn, which earlier I was a little worried about. But the a7 pawn is actually under attack here by two pieces and defended by one. However, it's not really a good idea to take it right now, and my move, bishop e7, simply developing the bishop and preparing to castle, in a way it looks like it hangs that piece. Now, did I have a variation prepared for this? I think I did. Let me look. Bishop e7, white castles instead of rook takes a7. So if rook takes a7, let's go ahead and show you what I did play, which is, oh, he castled. I'm sorry, I was out of order a little bit. And I'm still getting used to looking at the move list off the screen, off your screen. So that's why there's just a little bit of confusion. I'll figure that out eventually. Here, white could have played rook takes a7. Let me pull that variation up real quick, and I'll show you why I think this is actually a little mistake. It looks like it just wins a pawn because you have the swap here on a7, but castling, and then if he withdraws that, now black has this a file pretty much to himself. In fact, this actually is kind of hairy, in my opinion. I think black is starting to get, for the cost of one pawn, black has the only real open file on the board, pretty much to himself. And where's this queen going to go? right? I mean, the queen can't go here. It's going to be really bad anywhere on black's side over here. I think every square it could go to is protected. So it's going to have to go over here, and then we're going to have discoveries. So this looks bad. This, I think, there probably is a little bit better variation, or there might be a little bit better variation for white here. But this is a reason why I think it was bad for white maybe to take that a pawn. At the very least, for the cost of a pawn, two pieces are becoming more active than they would have otherwise. And so I think even though that pawn is hanging, I think white probably made the right decision by not taking it. Whether or not, he may not have even seen it. I don't know. Okay, so white goes ahead and castles here. Black, that's me, decides that the a6 pawn could potentially be good to take at some point. So part of the problem here, though, is that we have a little bit of a pin. This a8 pawn is undefended right now, so this a pawn, even though it's advanced to a6, there could be some weird tricks going on at some point. So we have to be careful not to let this a pawn hang and not to let this pin come into play. So black decides to castle. White plays knight d2 before that. I just kind of skipped through that, but I wanted to get to where the point I was making, which is connecting the rooks takes that pin away. So obviously white has also developed a piece, and that's fine. All right, so here, I suppose this is an active plan, but getting this bishop into maybe a hole in my defense seems like a good idea. This bishop b6 stuff seems like a good idea, and it just doesn't seem like this is firmly entrenched enough to me. And I thought at the time that it was probably a little bit offsides. I simply just move right now, and he develops, I suppose that's to a pretty active square. He's trying to probably get it back into d4 and the like. At some point, though, I decide I want to keep him out of g5, but mainly just restricting that piece. I think over the next 10 or so moves that my real theme is to make my two minor pieces, which are bishops, better than his two minor pieces, which is a bishop and a knight. So restricting that knight's options in any way I can is a good idea. And his bishop is really struggling to make a name for himself in my side over here. So like I said, I'm going to try to make my minors better. One way I can do that pretty clearly is get it outside of the pawn chain, as I alluded earlier. So this diagonal here, I can grab that. It interferes with the queen's protection of the bishop. It comes with tempo, attacking a more valuable piece. And now I have an access route to those squares where I thought my bishop would be dominant. So this is a very active move for me. I'm feeling pretty good about the potential of getting my piece in here. So he's going to have to move here, and then I can actually get to c4 with tempo. So this is looking better for black right now than probably it has any right to. Just this bishop getting out there and getting active. So he moves to protect his rook, and now we're into c4. We're halfway home. This is a pretty active square. I mean, I'm going to be pretty happy here, I think. But it would be even better if I can get to this diagonal, and then I've got an entire diagonal where almost every square is good for my light square bishop. So I really have just one more move, and it may have been even better at this point. And in fact, looking at this, I don't see why I didn't just play bishop d3. Maybe just because I'm trying to get more pieces into the game. It may be better this way, so that I can kind of cut off the queen's protection of the dark square bishop here. So the queen has to move away, and now I can get even more activity. Because now this move comes with tempo. I have to get the he has to get his dark square bishop out of there. He finds a move that actually doesn't do that, or that allows him to not do that, and that is queen f2. So with queen f2, instead of retreating here and letting me make all my dreams come true and taking away his, he's keeping a hold of his last little bit of hope of keeping his bishop inside of my territory. I think what he'd really like to do is get it to d6, where he can take his bad bishop and take away my good bishop. But my good bishop really isn't doing anything. So it might not be that bad of an idea for me to get to make that trade with his bishop being so active as it is. So, at this point, making my last couple of pieces active is a good idea. I've got a decent light square bishop. My good bishop is back on e7, ready to, do something if the position arises for it to. But what bringing the rook in also does is it gives me a little bit of support for this c5 square, where I could potentially play bishop to c5, and now that bishop is going to be taken away. We'll play bishop c5, just for an example, we play bishop c5, bishop takes, rook takes, or queen takes. And now I've traded off his active bishop for my good bishop, but inactive bishop. And then my job is just going to be making my other bishop dominate the center of the board up here on e4 and d3 and f5, these three squares right here, and maybe even g6. This is a very important diagonal for me if I can get there. All right, so he retreats. I do play the restricting move I was talking about earlier. Here I'm just trying to make his knight have less scope. He's taken away one of the forward squares for his knight by himself by playing the bishop to d4. So now the knight doesn't have as many squares where it can go to. It can't go to, well, it could go to h4 to make a trade if it wanted to try to offer a trade. But there's nothing really it can do from there. It would just kind of be out on its own. Knight g5 can't do. e5 it can't do. d4 it can't do. It could go to d2 and have some active role, trying to trade off his sort of inactive piece for my soon-to-be active piece or semi-active piece. And then these two squares back here. So really the knight just has the one square, d2, where it can do anything active. So taking away another forward place for the knight here actually does some good, I think. It's really restricting one of his minor pieces. Here, this probably just has to do with the diagonal where the queen is, and maybe thinking, okay, that knight may not, or that bishop may not be there forever, so we don't want to get skewered. So that's just a purely defensive move for him, I think. It's probably not necessary yet, but he's just being overly cautious, I think. All right, so here, getting the rooks in the game again, it's possible that we could be doubling on the c-file, which I don't think is very useful since there's a little bit of a roadblock on the c-file right now. But getting this rook into the game on maybe b6 later and up against this pawn on b2 might be something that could happen. But basically just getting the rook into the game is kind of the idea right now. So he does do this knight d2 move, which I was talking about earlier, as being basically the only active thing that knight can do. The only thing at all it can do right now is to play knight d2. So he does try to make use of the piece and maybe chop off one of my active pieces in the trade. But here we have the hole on d3 where I can now make my bishop. Getting to this diagonal at all, I have h7, g6, f5, e4, where I'm at d3. I even could go to c2 right now if I wanted to, just because the knight's in the way of the queen's protection of it. So almost any square along this diagonal, if I can just get to it, then I can just move along it freely and have a very active bad bishop anywhere along that diagonal. So just sticking it in there at d3 is going to be enough to accomplish the goal. So while he tried to make that trade, what he actually could have tried to stop that somehow. I don't know if he could have or not. Actually, if you go back and look, is there any way he can stop me from getting to d3? Possibly moving his rook to d1? Could possibly do it. It would just lose the exchange, I guess. So right, there's no, I guess there isn't anything that white can do now to stop this penetration. And this penetration, I think, is a big, big deal. So black accomplishes the goal of getting the light square bishop outside of the pawn chain. And white now is really kind of tied down. There aren't just a whole lot of squares for his pieces. Some of the back row is cut off of the rooks. The knight really only can just move back and forth here. The queen is protecting b2. It can't really move off of here, and two of these squares are taken. It's just really, white is running out of options, and black's pieces are becoming more and more active as we go. So black firmly entrenches the knight, or good grief. Black firmly entrenches the bishop on e4, and now, again, this whole diagonal is available to black for the light square bishop. Now we're trying to get some freedom for the pieces. We've got the queen tied down to protecting b2. So white decides, okay, we need to get some more freedom for the queen by finding another piece to protect b2. So we're going to try to maybe get the rooks involved. Obviously you can't come to b1, but this rook is doing really the work of a pawn. It's taking on the role of what a pawn would normally do, which is just helping out a brother. Taking a very valuable piece and reducing it to this guard duty is something that if you find yourself doing a lot in a position, then you're probably in some trouble. Now, black could maybe just come in here to b3 with the queen, attacking both pieces, but there's really no, we're defended twice here, so just making the rook move back just for the sake of making it move back doesn't really do a whole lot. The rook still can't really come into the game easily because of the bishop here. So we need to find a different route to get some more attackers on b2. So doubling here, possibly a back row weakness if maybe this pawn were to move and maybe this rook were to move. So there is some. For one, this is a half open file. The C file is half open here. So there is something for the rooks to do on that file. Obviously, it's a little bit nebulous at this point, but we can get sort of a little line into the defense of white by pivoting on the c4 square. The c4 square is now a pivoting point. There's no guarding of that square. If the knight were on d2, then yes, the c4 pawn would be taken away, but the knight right now is on f3, so it might be a good idea for white to play knight d2 here to stop this penetration, where we can get the rooks over here and start weakening the defense of that b2 pawn again. And he does. I'm trying to remember why exactly I played bishop f5, and I'm not sure I remember right now what I was thinking. Just looking at it, trying to think on the spot why I played bishop f5. To me, it seems like a little bit of a strange move at this point. So, oh, I guess it was because I didn't want to lose that piece. I didn't want him to play knight takes e4, basically. So yeah, that makes sense. As I said earlier, I just didn't notice that threat looking here. It's been a while since I've looked at the game. So knight takes e4 is a threat here that I don't really want. I guess it just loses a pawn as well. So again, I have this whole diagonal to my use, and I just pulled the bishop back one square to bishop f5. I was focusing all my attention on the c4 square as the reason for knight d2. I just forgot that it actually hits the knight as well. So knight d2 is a good move, and bishop f5, preserving the good bishop there that's active outside. It's actually a bad bishop, but outside the pawn chain, so active. And he just comes back here, and this is almost just because he doesn't have anything else he can do. Literally, there just aren't a whole lot of other moves. However, I think I would prefer almost anything. I think knight f3 allows rook c4 here, and to me, it just seems like a mistake. There just aren't a whole lot of moves for white. I mean, what else is white going to do? Just shuffle the king back and forth? I think that's preferable to knight f3. I think h3 is preferable to knight f3, taking away the back rank weakness. I think maybe even b4 is preferable. b4 would cut off this rank as a penetration point. Even if you had the pivot point on c4, there's nowhere to go there. Yes, it makes sort of a backwards-ish pawn here on an open file, but that bishop is going to be could lock that down for a long time. So it would really blunt black's ideas. So it just seems like knight f3 here is a pretty big mistake. And now we can get the rooks active, and he's just shuffling that knight back and forth at this point. So now we're going to sort of pile up over here. We traded off one set of rooks, so now our back rank is even more weak. And we start to penetrate. Now we really have a lot of threats. We have the back row threats. Right now there aren't any, but they are in the air. Say the knight moves, then we're going to have to get the queen all the way back to g1 just to stop checkmate there. The rook is off the back rank, but we've also abandoned our attack of the b2 pawn. So he's protecting his back row again now that the b2 pawn is no longer under attack. However, it is again. But now the bishop cannot take the rook, so the rook slides over. But we've got all sorts of pins here, and all sorts of crazy tactics in the air. We've got a back rank threat here, say this pawn is out of the way. We've got some things that could happen on the back rank, and again, I know that g1 is still a decent blocking square, but white has never taken the time to play h3, which he probably should have. We have a discovery on b1. If the queen moves out of the way, then the bishop can take on b1. We have a pin on the queen here. Black's queen is protected, but white's... Oh, actually it is. Actually it is. So I'm wrong about that. There isn't really a huge pin on the white queen here yet, though there could be in the future. So there are all kinds of things developing here, and white is still pretty tied down. So black decides the last thing it needs to do is to just throw a pawn at the whole... This is kind of like throwing like a little rubber ball at a Jenga tower. To me, that's the way I think of this. This whole white defensive camp here is just hanging on by a thread, with black's pieces swarming all over the place. And now, if we just upset things just a little bit, by throwing just a little block at the tower, maybe it'll all come collapsing down. And I remember at the time, I kind of hit on that idea. I wasn't sure what else I could do. I'd made my pieces pretty active. I still can't quite get my dark square bishop in the game. So is there a way I can get my dark square bishop in the game? Well, if I have that b7 pawn at b4, the pin, and there's not really a pin here, but this file, I should say, will possibly open up, or there's going to be some activity along this file. This diagonal could come in. I'm going to have two active bishops instead of just the one. And things could come crashing down for white pretty quickly. So white is just trying to reinforce things, get out of maybe this potential pin, while still protecting the back rank and protecting the knight. So everything's still kind of locked down here, but white doesn't have a whole lot of moves as options here. So black continues to try to throw the block at the tower here. And what we're going to have here is probably, if b takes c3, then this bishop comes down here, and now we still have pretty much all the defense is still there. However, what white actually does, and let me show you what I mean. Well, let's just go forward, actually, because white makes a huge blunder here. I think c takes b4 is the worst move in the game. And if you just... I can show you that by just showing you the position after bishop takes b4 and just examining all of the problems. For one, we have this. C file is now completely black's. The only completely open file in the game, and it's completely dominated by black. We have both pieces being active. Both minor pieces being extremely active. We have a pin on this. This piece is attacked twice and defended once, so it's a problem, and it's pinned. We have a discovery on the rook. We have all sorts of activity for all the pieces. Every piece for black is doing something active. Every piece for white is doing something defensive. We're defending the pawns here, right? We're just kind of stuck here being pinned, basically. We're defending the back rank. So all of these things are active for black, and all these things are defensive for white. And at this point, the house of cards just starts to fall. At this point, white resigned because the... Let's see, what did he do? Okay. At this point, white resigned because he's going to lose at minimum the rook, I believe. So, and that's in addition to the piece that he just traded off. So, one possible continuation of this would be that right there. And now black is just a full rook up and still very active all over the place. So here we're going to have to trade off pieces. And this is a possible finish for the game. I want to look real quick and see if there were any other. Let's go back to right here. What was bishop e3? Oh, okay, yeah. Right here. Okay, yeah, this was it. There was one place where I thought black had a little bit better move. Right here. Actually, I'm not finding where I was talking about. Um, I had listed a few things that I wanted to talk about. I'm trying to go back and find them. Um, right here. Instead of playing, as it did, knight d2, white might have considered playing. This is something I just forgot to talk about when I was going through the game. White might have considered playing bishop e3, and the idea here is threatening knight d4. So that was another way that white could have maybe stopped some of this penetration by black on this side. Um, it was just an idea that I had that I threw in there, and I meant to talk about it at the time and throw it in as an idea, but I got a little sidetracked talking about a bunch of things on the way. So, quick review of the game. There we go. We have a little bit different move order in the opening that I think was just fine, and there's probably a name for that, and it may even be Paulson. As I said, I don't know the names of these variations, but it just transposed back into what I consider the mainline French advance. And this A4 idea, this would be something where if you watched this and you have some ideas of why White might have wanted to play A4, it's not a line. I didn't see it in any of the opening book lines anywhere. As soon as we play A4 here, we're out of book. So, I doubt that it's anything, but maybe somebody has an idea of exactly why it might be something that White might want to pursue. There might be an advantage to having that open A file, but it never materialized in this game. We had the pins and attacking the pins here for White. White had some activity here, but this Queen C7 defensive move kind of fizzled all of White's attack. Now there was also the missed tactic on E5 back here as well. So the tension relieved, and then the theme for the next few moves was making the minor pieces more active. And once one side was able to do that while denying the other side the ability to do that, the game turned very quickly. Getting the rooks active, there was a little battle on C4 with the knight, and getting the rooks to be active, then taking over the C file and throwing the block at the Jenga tower to make the whole thing fall down. And those last few moves were not part of the game. Right there, I believe, is where the game actually ended. So, I hope you enjoyed the game. If you have any comments or suggestions for this game or future videos or future games, I hope to go over all of my Team League 45 games, of which I have played a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I played 11 of them. I believe I've won 5 or 6 of them. I have 2 draws. So I've got a lot of games that I can go over. And if you have suggestions about which ones I could go over or ways that I could do better in the presentation, I would love to hear them. Okay, guys? Thanks for watching.